The worst thing I've actually encountered in terms of creepy was a little developing sociopath. He had history, fire, animals, sex, and was apparently high in callous and unemotional traits. He was about 11 when I first met him, so no one was going to call him antisocial personality disorder or anything, but that's what he looked like he was growing into. Anyway, the kid is incredibly funny, smart, and charming. No one can believe what his previous school and doctors were saying about him. I was new there, so I was taken in as well. Then, one day he gets in trouble for stealing, and we had the proof on camera, but he didn't know that. I'm sitting in as a witness and security while he's going through this whole series of emotions: surprise, indignation, fear, anger, etc., as he pretends he has no idea why he's being accused. Then we show the tape and he just stops dead, blank expression, and says something to the effect of, "So what, you were just wasting my time." It was another voice, a completely different personality coming out of this kid, like you flipped a switch. I've seen some things, but that moment was creepy as hell. I'm not a psychologist, but I was in a mental institution for attempt suicide. Lots of bad things had happened to lead me to that choice. Please don't judge. But, as I was saying, there was this girl there, named Anna, and she would comb her hair in the morning and talk to herself. Sometimes she would start to violently scream at herself. One time she grabbed her hair as if it wasn't her pulling it, and forcefully bashed her head repeatedly into the mirror screaming, "Love me. Love me." And at night she would start to play with herself and scream her father's name. I have never been so scared in my life. This girl Anna was only 15. Her father would rape and abuse her. The mother was beaten also. I never want to relive that ever again. I was in a psych ward for depression, and my roommate was terrifying. She was schizophrenic, depressed, and also probably just weird. She punched herself in the face constantly, while whispering to the voices in her head. She also used to sit in the multi-purpose room, TV, games, fridge, etc., on the floor and masturbated. Like, a lot. But she never stopped whispering to herself while she did it. I woke up to pee one night, and she was just in her bed, staring blankly at me. She was moved to a long-term facility on my third day there. Not a professional, but a friend of mine is suffering the Capgras delusion. We moved apart several years ago and hadn't been in touch very well. I knew she had gone through some stressful times. I had a couple of phone calls with her where she was worried that her computer had been hacked, but she seemed reasonable. Then one day she called me and told me that her husband had been replaced with an imposter. She wanted me to fly to visit her so I could see him with my own eyes and confirm for her that it wasn't really him. Talking to her is simultaneously fascinating, unnerving, and heartbreaking. The worst part is, while she is clearly not correct in her beliefs, she is quite consistent in them and they are utterly real in her mind. Imagine how terrified you would be all the time if you were certain that the most important person in your life was a stranger, with mysterious nefarious motivations. Imagine going to bed every night next to someone you thought was out to get you. Imagine spending all day desperately trying to find your husband because he must be out there somewhere, right? Nobody's been diagnosed with this in 40-odd years or so, but it's still taught in most undergrad courses because it's a really good example of a culture-specific disorder. It's called Wendigo psychosis, or Wendigo, Weedico, or Winneco, and here's how it goes down. You're a young male in an Algonquin tribe. It's been a long, cold winter, and your whole tribe is starving. You and your hunting partner have been out hunting for moose or deer or even a bear if you have two, but you've totally struck out. You're starving. He's starving. And you've seen the way he's starting to look at you over the fire at night. So you do what you have to do before he does. You kill him and eat him. You know what happens when you eat another man, but you're starving and it's cannibalize or die. So you eat him. And the Wendigo comes and possesses you, because the Wendigo possesses everyone who eats someone else. And now that the Wendigo has possessed you, you're hungrier than you were? Hungrier than you've ever been before. But the only thing you're hungry for is more people. So you back to your tribe and one of two things happen. First, you tell someone, and they attempt to cure you by having you eat melted bear fat until you vomit the heart of ice you now have, because you are a Wendigo demon. 35% of reported cases were cured by this method. Second, you don't tell anyone, got back to your tribe, and attempt to kill and eat a family member. You will eventually be stopped and killed during your murder-cannibalism rampage, and your remaining family members will burn your body and scatter the ashes to prevent the Wendigo from possessing them too. The other 65% of reported cases. Capgras delusion. The Capgras delusion is usually a symptom of paranoid schizophrenia, which seems all kinds of horrifying. Basically, A person with this delusion becomes convinced that a loved one or close friend has been replaced by an identical imposter. They'll acknowledge that the person looks the same, but they are convinced that it is someone else, like a robot, or something other strange. I seem to remember learning about a case where a person ended up killing and cutting open their father's head to prove he was a robot. Paranoid schizophrenia in general seems like it would definitely be the most disturbing disorder to personally experience. Most people take for granted that what they see and experience is real, but imagine not being able to trust anything you experience or think. I am a paranoid schizophrenic. I don't believe there is anything scarier on the planet than an episode. Nothing is more terrifying than being betrayed by your own mind. The things you hear and see. It's awful. I will always remember my first episodes because they are haunting enough to stick with me till this day. I was 12 or 13 years old and I was laying in bed trying to sleep, but I was uncomfortable and couldn't get myself to doze off. As I'm laying there, a shadow moves across my vision. Instinctively I turn to look at it. The dark figure comes closer and sits at the end of my bed. Thankfully at this age I did not see a face. It was a woman entirely in black. She sat and she watched me for the entire night, the entire time whispering to me. "They hate you, no one loves you, kill them, the kitchen, the knives, daddy's gun, end it, you can't run, I will find you." Something tells me I should have screamed for my mother or father. For help, but I couldn't. I believed what it told me. But I did not do what it said. I have triggers now that I've noticed. For me, basements are the root of evil in my head. The most common hallucinations being of a little girl. She leads me to a hole in the floor where she drags me under. When I come back up, I always try to end it. My worst episode occurred when I was in a Walmart. I made a huge scene and I had to be taken away by ambulance. Actually, I had been shopping for something for dinner when all of a sudden everyone I saw around me turned and looked at me. They gathered circling around me. I couldn't break through. They were telling me to kill myself. I remember waking up in a hospital after that. My mother tells me I dropped in the floor and started screaming and clawing at my wrists. A lot of people know about phantom limb syndrome, in which someone continues to feel as if their limb is still there after it has been amputated, often in great pain. Another interesting one that not many people know about and is almost kind of an opposite is body integrity identity disorder, which is when a person has extremely strong feelings that one or more of their limbs does not belong to them, despite being functional, and often they really want to amputate. From their descriptions, it seems that it is actually very psychologically painful, sometimes to the point that they will self-amputate because no doctor is willing to amputate a healthy limb. Reactive attachment disorder. I worked at a group home for kids with this disorder and it was creepy before I fully understood it. Children who have suffered severe abuse and neglect early in life often have their ability to form healthy attachments to caregivers, or anyone, destroyed. Some of them would cling to me, call me mommy, and beg to come home with me 30 seconds after I met them. Others would refuse to talk to anyone, hurt themselves, and others set fires and act out any chance they could. Sometimes they would improve enough to be sent to foster homes only to have their behavior come back worse once they were placed in an unstructured family setting. Fatal familial insomnia is pretty scary. Suddenly, you just start not being able to fall asleep, and you're gone within 7 to 36 months. You gradually lose the ability, along with a number of other symptoms over time, until it eventually, at the end of the last stage, you'll have not slept in a long time, will have been hallucinating and suffering from dementia, and eventually die. Only 40 families, about 100 people, have the disorder. Also, if you have it, there's a good chance you'll have kids by its onset, making the disorder pass down ever further. Scary stuff. I'm neither a psych major or a psychologist, however I did spend a week in a mental ward. I had depression, I told the cop I wanted to kill myself in a fit of rage, etc. etc. The hospital I was at was divided. One side was Group A, folks who needed treatment but were considered safe. Group B was the folks that had to be watched a lot more closely. About 2 days after I was checked in, another woman had come in too. She was placed in Group A, and was placed as my roommate. At first she seemed nice and normalish, but after a few hours, her stories were getting mixed up. I mean, she came in, found out I had a kid, then said she had a daughter as well who lived with her mother-in-law or something. After dinner, the story was her daughter had been brutally murdered by her father and that the woman didn't even care. I voiced my concerns to the nurses, but was told to just go to bed, in the same room with her. It took a while for me to fall asleep that night because my sleep schedule was all sorts of messed up. I think I passed out around midnight. We were put to bed at 8 p.m. I'm not sure how long I was asleep for before I was woken up to my roommate strangling me. Now, we were placed in the last room at the end of the hall. far from the nurse's desk. Plus I was being strangled, so I couldn't even yell for help. I thought I was going to die, but I had fallen asleep with a book. So I bashed the book on my roommate's head and booked it out of the room. The nurses probably thought I was the super crazy one, yelling at them. I'm not sure they would have believed me if it wasn't for the fact I had hand marks around my neck. My roommate was transferred to the other side of the ward, locked up with limited time out of her room. I never bothered to ask what her deal was. I didn't want to know. I had a new roommate by the end of the day. A really nice older lady who was a lesbian. I told her about crazy roommate number 1 and we would just shoot the poop for hours at night until I was ready to pass out. I'm a psych major, so not a professional, but in my opinion it is catatonic schizophrenia. Those suffering from this type of schizophrenia, although in the DSM-V they are getting rid of the different types of schizophrenia, there will just be one classification, will sometimes be unable to speak or move. My professor worked in a clinic while in school and told us of one patient who would suddenly lock up into extremely awkward position and not move for extended periods of time.